Tonight, before your eyelids grow heavy and the room around you softens into that warm, familiar hush, I want you to take a slow breath and step with me into a December that feels both distant and strangely close, a December woven from relief and confusion, and the quiet, trembling joy of a country trying to remember how to celebrate again, after years spent flinching at every unexpected sound. And as you settle into whatever chair or bed you're listening from, feel the temperature around you shift ever so slightly, as though 1945 itself were opening a door and letting you in. You're standing now in the first peaceful Christmas America has seen in too long a time. Though even as the word peaceful floats through your mind, it feels as fragile as a snowflake landing on your sleeve, something that could melt the moment you look away. And the air in this room, this imagined room you're slowly stepping into, tastes sharp and clean, the way winter always tastes when a chapter has just ended, and no one quite knows what the next line will say. The floorboards creak softly beneath your feet, the way old houses do when they're adjusting to company, and you sense a blend of hope and exhaustion woven into every sound, because December 1945 is not loud, not triumphant, not cinematic. It is quiet, almost shy, filled with people tiptoeing back into their own lives, as if afraid they might wake something they don't want to face. And as snow begins to gather along porch rails and window ledges, you feel the landscape trying to soften itself for you, muffling its own edges, calming itself so you can walk forward without fear. Before we go any further, take a moment right here, right now, to gently like the video, if this calm little journey feels right to you, and subscribe only if you want more nights like this, nights where history sinks its weight into your pillow and wraps you gently in its quieter stories. And if you're still awake enough, whisper into the comments where you're listening from and what time glows on your clock, because it always feels a little warmer, knowing who else is drifting through these moments beside you. Now dim the lights in your room, tuck your hands somewhere comfortable, and let the glow of 1945 settle around you like a blanket, warming slowly near a radiator. You step forward, crossing the threshold of a modest American home in late December, and instantly you feel that mixture of relief and uncertainty thickening the air like slow rising steam. This is a country exhaling for the first time in years, adjusting to freedom with the hesitancy of someone waking from a nightmare, and not yet convinced the danger is gone. And everywhere you look you see rituals being rebuilt in careful, trembling shapes, trees half decorated, families speaking in voices still tuned to wartime hush, children humming songs without knowing why the melodies feel both joyous and strange. A Christmas tree stands in the corner, branches angled awkwardly as though unsure whether they are allowed to look full again after so many years of scarcity. And when you reach out and touch one ribbon, you realize it is made from parachute silk, left over from the war, soft and slightly cool against your fingertips, whispering with the faintest sound of repurposed courage. The lights flicker, not out of charm but because the wiring is older than anyone wants to admit, and the bulbs dim and brighten like small hearts still learning how to beat in peaceful rhythms. A child kneels beside you, arranging a tin ornament with the slow, deliberate concentration only children possess, and the tune he hums carries something deeper than he understands. A borrowed sadness mixed with practiced optimism, because children absorb atmospheres long before they absorb facts. And this house, this whole country has been holding its breath for so long. From another room you hear the soft rattle of a stovetop lid and smell something warm and sweet, the kind of treat that would have tasted extravagant during rationing years. And although rationing is ending, you can still sense the instinctive restraint in every movement, every measured scoop of sugar, every cautious stir of a wooden spoon. Adults speak quietly because they forgot how not to, glancing toward the front door with that leftover wartime reflex that trained bodies to expect bad news even when minds insist it's over. And the silence between their sentences feels heavy but healing, as if the house itself is slowly stretching after years of curling inward. Step outside for a moment. The street glows under a thin, wintry halo and snowflakes drift sideways beneath a street lamp, while a neighbor mutters at a stubborn string of bulbs, celebrating quietly when they finally flicker to life, because triumphs in 1945 come small and personal. One working light, one returning sun, one uninterrupted night's sleep. A group of teenagers passes you, laughing too loudly, joy cracking open inside them like a long-sealed window finally lifting. And although their laughter carries the unspoken ache of names missing from their circle, they let the wind take that sadness for now. Walk deeper into the night and notice how every window, every porch, every hesitant decoration seems to be repeating the same soft truth. We are trying, and in this December, trying is enough. You return to the house where we began, push open the door, and feel the warmth gather around you like a slow embrace. A record spins gently on a turntable, filling the room with carols that wobble slightly, but still manage to feel like hope wearing familiar clothing. And as you settle into the glow of this fragile new piece, you sense how the country is learning awkwardly, tenderly, to breathe together again. You stay in that doorway for a long, soft moment, letting the warmth of one peaceful living room soak into you. And then, as if some quiet hand were taking yours, you find yourself drifting sideways through the winter air, slipping out of one house and into another, where Christmas doesn't feel like decoration and recipes first, but like a test of what it means to come home as someone who is no longer quite the same. You're standing now in a narrow hallway where the wallpaper curls at the corners and the runner rug has a permanent crease worn into it by years of pacing feet, and you can hear a furnace humming in the basement with an irregular little thump, as if it too is trying to remember its rhythm, and the smell of drying wool coats hangs in the air, heavy and damp, whispering of cold platforms and long journeys and boots that have stood in places no one at this table will ever see. The front door opens with a groan that sounds louder than it really is, and a wave of December air pushes into the house, sharp and clean and edged with train smoke and snow, and a young man steps inside wearing an army uniform that already looks slightly wrong on him, not because it doesn't fit, but because his shoulders have settled into a different shape than the one frozen in the family photographs. He sets down his duffel bag very gently, as though it might explode into memories if he lets it fall, and his mother takes half a step forward and then stops, caught in that strange space between wanting to rush into his arms and not quite knowing who exactly she is rushing toward. By Christmas of 1945, millions of American servicemen are being carried back across oceans and continents on the ships and planes of Operation Magic Carpet. And if you listen closely, you can almost hear the echo of that name in the way this hallway seems to lengthen and contract around him. A thin strip of floorboards trying to become a landing strip, a gangplank, a threshold between the life that went on without him and the one that waited like a paused breath for his return. And as his mother finally reaches out and lays her hand against his cheek, you see a smile rise to the surface of his face, small and careful like something freshly unwrapped and not yet tested. He moves into the living room, where an armchair has been angled toward the fireplace in quiet anticipation, and he hesitates before sitting the way someone hesitates before taking cover behind the wrong kind of wall. For a split second he looks like he expects to be told where to stand, how far to march, which direction to face, and you notice that even when he lowers himself into the cushions, his back doesn't quite touch the chair, as if his body has forgotten how to fully relax, because for years rest meant danger and tension meant survival, and that wiring does not reset itself just because the calendar has reached December. On the mantel above him stands a photograph in a plain wooden frame, a younger version of this same boy in a high school suit, cheeks rounder, eyes less guarded, mouth tilted, in an easy grin that assumed the future automatically, and you watch him glance at that picture and then look away so quickly it almost counts as a flinch. His father, standing nearby with his hands buried deep in his pockets, tries a joke about how the kid has finally learned how to stand up straight, but the joke collapses halfway through, and what hangs in the air instead is the gentle ache of two men trying to build a bridge out of ordinary words between lives that do not line up as neatly as either of them had hoped. At the dining table, a simple Christmas meal waits. Nothing extravagant, because rationing has not fully loosened its grip yet, and meat still has the weight of careful planning stamped into every bite. And when they sit down, you notice that the returning son eats with the precise, controlled movements of someone trained to make do with what appears on the plate, pausing now and then as if listening for sounds that only existed thousands of miles away. Engines, shells, shouts, sounds that still echo faintly in his nervous system, even though the only thing rattling here is a loose window pane in a winter gust. His little sister, who has grown taller while he was gone, and is quietly proud of having new stories of her own, leans close and chatters about the high school Christmas pageant, about a new teacher who makes algebra almost bearable, about a neighbor's dog that steals laundry off the line, and you can feel his gratitude for her easy stream of nothing in particular, because nothing in particular is the most luxurious sound in the world to someone who has lived on the edge of everything. Walk with me now a few houses down, where the story of coming home plays out in a slightly different key. Here the soldier steps over the threshold with a young woman at his side, a fiancée he met in the compressed, accelerated time of training camps and departure gates, and the parents do their best to offer smiles and cocoa and compliments about her lovely manners, but beneath the politeness you can sense their bewilderment, because this stranger has shared parts of their son's life that they were never allowed to see, and now, in this small living room, with a lopsided tree and a radio humming in the background, they must learn to fit their own memories around the experiences she carries quietly in her eyes. She laughs a little too brightly when they ask questions, fingers tightening around the handle of her cup, and you can almost feel her silently rehearsing what it means to belong to a family that knows version 1 of a man, while she has only ever known version 2, the one shaped by barracks and troop ships and letters written under dim bulbs that swung with the motion of the sea. The tree lights throw tiny shifting reflections across her face, and in those reflections you catch flashes of fear, hope, and a determination not to mess this up, not to waste the fragile piece they have all been handed like glass. Out on another street, a returning soldier stands in front of a house that used to be his anchor point in the world, only to find new curtains in the windows and unfamiliar silhouettes moving behind the glass, because the people who once waited here have moved away, unable to sit year after year in rooms that echoed with absence. He traces the note taped to the door with a gloved finger, breath clouding in the cold, as he reads words that explain and apologize and still leave him standing alone on the porch, duffel bag at his feet, wondering where home has gone, now that the war has stopped, but life has not waited politely for him to catch up. There are houses too where no boots cross the threshold, where the armchair in the corner remains stubbornly empty, while the rest of the room fills up with the faint sweetness of cookies and the thin sound of carols drifting from a neighbor's radio. In one such room a father sits with a rigid back and a sealed cardboard box on his lap, the box sent by the War Department and never opened because he is not ready to accept what it contains. And every time carolers pass by and their music rises up through the window, his face shifts for just a moment between pride and grief, before settling back into the careful stillness he wears for the sake of everyone else. In the kitchen of that same house, a mother wipes her eyes with the back of her hand and checks an oven that does not really need checking, because motion is easier than stillness, and tasks are easier than thoughts, and a small child on the floor arranges wooden blocks into patterns that make sense, only to them, blissfully unaware that there is an extra chair at the table for someone who will not be coming through the door. Grief in these rooms doesn't shout. It settles like fine dust along the mantel and into the folds of curtains, becoming part of the daily air people breathe, even while they hang stockings and wrap gifts. A few streets away, in a cramped rented room with peeling paint and a single rattling window, a newly married couple sets up their first Christmas tree, a small one that just barely fits between the bed and the tiny stove, and the young man, another returned soldier, another tired pair of eyes, hangs his uniform carefully in the closet before touching his wife's shoulder and telling her that, with the help of the GI Bill, he might be able to start school in the spring. She nods, half delighted and half terrified, because the rent already strains their savings, and the walls are so thin they can hear the neighbours breathe. But she has saved a small square of chocolate, wrapped in newspaper, and tied with string, and placed it on the table as his gift, and when he sees it, his whole face softens into a look that has nothing to do with sugar, and everything to do with the feeling of being seen. As you drift above these streets, the pattern begins to emerge like a town seen from the window of a night train. In one house, laughter is too loud, because people are trying to drown out memories. In another, it is too quiet because they are afraid to disturb ghosts. In some places, the uniform is worn proudly to Christmas dinner. In others, it is folded away in a drawer because the sight of it makes someone's chest ache. And threaded through all of it is the same fragile wish that this peace will last long enough for everyone to learn who they are now. Outside, the snow keeps falling with that patient, muffling insistence only winter understands, softening the edges of roofs and fences and letters carved into headstones, and returning soldiers walk along icy sidewalks with their collars turned up, breathing in the smell of coal smoke and pine wreaths and bakery windows, slowly teaching their bodies that footsteps on pavement can simply mean going home and not moving toward danger, that a doorbell can mean friends and not news. You float there with them for a while, listening to the crunch of their boots and the distant crackle of a radio through opened windows, and you realize that Christmas 1945 is not a story of perfect reunions and tidy endings, but of people trying with awkwardness and courage and quiet persistence to fit themselves back into rooms and routines that no longer line up exactly with who they have become. And as the night deepens over this tired, hopeful country, you feel your own breathing slow to match its rhythm, because this is how peace really begins, not with grand speeches or fireworks, but with one careful step over a threshold, one uncertain smile at a table, one hand reaching out in the dark and finding that, somehow, someone is still there. You drift now toward the soft hum of another house not far from the others, and as you cross its threshold you feel the temperature shift again. Not colder, not warmer, but tighter somehow, as if the air itself has learned the instinct of rationing, stretching what little it has into something that must last. The kitchen you step into is small, its cupboards neat but noticeably sparse, and the first scent that greets you is something warm and humble simmering on the stovetop, potatoes maybe, or a thin stew coaxed into richness by hands that have spent years turning very little into almost enough. The woman at the counter measures sugar with the precision of a jeweler handling diamonds, tapping the spoon twice against the tin to make sure not a grain is wasted, and you realize immediately that rationing has not loosened its grip. The moment peace was declared, scarcity follows its own calendar, one that does not surrender simply because the fighting has stopped. Official rationing is ending, yes, but the habits stay, habits of saving, of stretching, of glancing at a recipe not as a whim but as a negotiation with what is left in the house. A mainstream fact drifts into place like a quiet footstep on the linoleum. Although wartime rationing technically ended in late 1945, staples like sugar remained restricted well into 1947, and the shortages of shipping, workers, and global supplies meant that kitchens like this one still cooked in the shadow of scarcity. You see it in the way she smooths the folded recipe card with her hand, its edges softened by years of use, its words edited in pencil to mark substitutions, less butter, fewer eggs, more creativity. She stirs a bowl of dough that looks a bit lumpy but smells determined, and a little smile tugs at her mouth as she recalls how many holidays she's kept afloat with tricks learned during the war. A quirky tidbit settles beside you at the table. Many families in 1945 used boiled raisins and even leftover bacon grease as substitutions for butter in cakes and cookies. Strange, perhaps, to your modern tastes, but to them these workarounds were badges of ingenuity, familiar flavors of survival. You step into the dining room where paper chains made by children loop across the windows like fragile garlands of hope. Some links are cut from old magazines, others from faded construction paper saved from previous years. A few are torn, taped back together, carrying the kind of imperfections that become loved simply because they exist at all. These decorations don't glitter, they endure, and enduring is its own kind of beauty. In 1945, on the table sits a small plate of hard candy, its bright colors almost defiant against the muted palette of wartime frugality. Someone in the family must have traded stamps or bartered with a neighbor to get enough sugar for even this small indulgence. Two older women set the table nearby, talking softly about how they used to stretch coffee with chicory, how butter came as pale blocks of margarine with little packets of yellow dye that had to be kneaded in by hand. They laugh about it now, thin, tired laughter, but laughter nonetheless. Historians still debate whether rationing built stronger communities or simply forged shared hardship. But as you listen to these women speak, you feel that the truth lives in the blurry middle space, where people quietly strengthened each other without realizing it. Step outside for a moment into the brittle December air. The neighborhood looks festive, but only at a glance. If you look longer, you see the careful restraint behind the sparkle. Families string fewer bulbs than they want to, partly to save money, partly because electricity-conscious habits linger. Wreaths are thinner than modern ones, fashioned from whatever branches could be gathered locally. One door sports a wreath decorated with mismatched buttons sewn onto strips of ribbon, each button shining faintly like a rescued memory. Another has painted walnut shells arranged like tiny ornaments. A family trudges by carrying a small, uneven Christmas tree. Tall ones were scarce this year. Transportation systems were still overloaded with troops and freight, not holiday greenery. But the children cling to that crooked tree like it's a treasure from a storybook, their joy untarnished by scale or polish. Their parents exchange a glance, a quick beam of relief that happiness sometimes is surprisingly inexpensive. A little farther down you find the local grocer behind his counter, his apron dusted with flour. Shelves behind him are patchy, a few canned goods, a small stack of flour sacks, uncertain supplies on the way. He reassures a customer that oranges should arrive by Christmas Eve, if the trains behave. In 1945, a single orange still feels like a wonder, something precious enough to be unwrapped like a gift. Scarcity sharpens gratitude in a way abundance never can. Back inside another warm house, a teenage girl stands over the stove stirring custard with trembling focus. This dessert mattered before the war, one of her grandmother's holiday recipes, and she is determined to revive it now that peace has returned. But years of rationing have erased confidence. Ingredients feel fragile, expensive, symbolic. She stirs anyway, breathing slowly, adjusting the flame with the kind of reverence usually reserved for prayers. Her hope fills the room more fully than the aroma ever could. On a nearby counter sits a worn ration book, its once stiff pages now floppy from use. The family no longer needs it for many things, but they keep it like a small, quiet relic, a record of what they endured, a testament to years when scarcity shaped choices down to the smallest crumbs. You run your fingers along the penciled notes scribbled in the margins. Weeks when cheese was stretched, when candles were saved, when patience and creativity were the primary ingredients in every meal. Walk with me now to a neighborhood potluck, hosted not out of abundance but out of wisdom. Families gather with dishes built from improvisation, casseroles bulked with breadcrumbs, vegetables stretched with spices from the back of cupboards, fruit cakes assembled from candied peels and pure determination. No one brings much, but everyone brings something. And when the ham earned through months of careful saving arrives, the group cheers softly, almost reverently. They do not touch it until everyone who contributed has arrived. Children weave between the adults carrying plates, their eyes wide at the sight of foods they haven't seen in years. Adults laugh gently, speak slowly, and carry the warmth of shared survival like a secret handshake. As night deepens, snow begins to drift lazily down, each flake tilting in the air like a slow exhale. You feel 1945, America balanced on a threshold, its old habits still clinging, its new hopes just beginning to take breath. Scarcity has etched itself into their kitchens, their hands, their expectations, but it has also sharpened their gratitude into something bright and earnest. Here, Christmas doesn't sit glitter with abundance. Here, Christmas glows from within. Scarcity hasn't dimmed their joy. It has distilled it. You step out of that warm kitchen and into the cold morning air of December 1945, and instantly the scene shifts around you. The quiet residential rhythm fading into the industrial pulse of a country trying to remember who it was before the war reshaped every muscle, every schedule, every breath. Ahead of you rises a factory building, long and rectangular, its metal siding dulled by years of production, its windows fogged with the ghosts of shifts that once ran day and night. During the darkest years, these halls throbbed with urgency, bomb casings slammed onto conveyor belts, rivets hammered into aircraft frames, engines tested until sparks danced at the edges of machinery. But now the echo inside has softened into something tentative, almost shy, as though the building itself isn't sure how to exist without the weight of conflict pressing against its walls. Inside, the floors are slick with a faint sheen of oil that lingers from the last war contracts, and tools sit neatly in trays like soldiers waiting for orders that will never come. The air smells of metal and cooling engines, a scent that feels strangely peaceful after years of frantic martial purpose. Women in work trousers and heavy boots move toward the factory gates, their steps measured, their breath forming little plumes in the cold. These women, millions of them across the country, once filled the gaps left by the men sent overseas. They built the planes, welded the steel, packed the parachutes, tested the engines, and kept entire production lines alive through improvisation, grit, and an unshakable clarity about necessity. One well-documented fact drifts into your awareness. By 1944, nearly 1 out of every 3 American workers was a woman. But now, with victory secured and returning servicemen seeking employment, employers and government pamphlets gently, and sometimes not gently, urge these women to step aside. You walk beside one of them as she pulls off her gloves, rubbing her hands together for warmth. She's proud of what she's done, though no one taught her how to hold pride. During the war, praise was sparse, and urgency was everything. Now she's been told her last day is after New Year's. The factory is shifting from bomb casings to appliances, and management insists those higher-paying mechanical jobs must go to the men who fought. She shrugs as if it doesn't break anything inside her, but the bitterness rising in her mouth is something she swallows like cold tea. Historians still debate whether the pressure on women to return home came more from cultural inertia or from coordinated messaging, but as you stand next to her, the academic dispute becomes irrelevant. What matters is the truth etched across her face. She does not want to disappear into the shadows the moment peace arrives. She boards a bus that once carried her and dozens of co-workers to night shifts and double shifts and shifts punctuated by sirens. Now the seats are half empty. The conversation is lower, weighted. A friend beside her whispers about a clerical job she might keep, less pay, fewer hours, but at least something. Another woman, older, stiff in the joints, says she will return to housekeeping for a wealthy family. She says it quietly, as though saying it too loudly might undo her dignity. A historical footnote floats in beside you. Many wartime nurseries, created so women could work full shifts, were shut down abruptly in late 1945, leaving mothers with fewer options and fewer voices in the decisions shaping their futures. Imagining the math in their heads is enough to make your own chest tighten. You step off the bus and drift down a residential street where laundry lines sag with winter linens. Several women gather on a porch, their coats buttoned to the throat, their hands wrapped around mugs of weak coffee. They speak in the hushed tone of people who share a private truth. They liked working. They liked the independence, the wages, the camaraderie over the clatter of machinery. They liked growing into themselves. And now, with peace restoring old expectations, they feel themselves shrinking quietly, unwillingly. Inside one house, a woman irons her husband's shirts with mechanical precision, though her mind is clearly elsewhere. On the kitchen table sits a photograph of her wearing her factory uniform, smiling in a way she didn't know she could smile before the war taught her what she was capable of. She touches the frame once, quickly, as though confirming that this version of herself still exists somewhere. Her teenage daughter watches from the doorway, absorbing everything without needing a single explanation. Many social historians argue that these daughters, watching their mothers move between expansion and contraction, became the seeds of later movements. You can feel that truth like a pulse beneath the floorboards. Walk farther with me, into another workplace break room where women pack medical supplies. Their laughter is softer than factory laughter, but still present, still alive. One woman tells a story about how she once fixed a jammed conveyor belt before 3 supervisors could understand what was wrong. The others cheer, proud of her, proud of themselves. Another detail emerges from wartime production reports. Many women became unofficial experts at tasks they were never formally trained for, learning by necessity and by helping one another. Now these same women discuss pamphlets encouraging them to return to homemaking. Some agree reluctantly, others bristle. A few stare straight ahead, thinking about paychecks that fed their families and jobs that made them feel like full people. You step outside into the crisp air. Snow curls across the sidewalk like thin white ribbons. A woman leaving a grocery store adjusts the scarf around her neck. Her hands are rough, stained faintly by factory dyes and cleaning compounds, hands that once tightened bolts now smoothing wool. She watches a group of boys pull a sled down the street, and for a moment you see longing flicker in her expression, a longing not for war but for the version of herself she found during it. Deeper into town, the local union hall buzzes softly with a meeting. Some women sit quietly, listening, others lean forward, asking about rights, about wages, about possibilities. Records from labor archives show clear evidence that women played significant roles in union strength during the war, roles they carried into peace, even as society asked them to step back. Tonight, their voices tremble. Yes, but they do not retreat. They are trying to understand whether history is closing a door or cracking a window. When the meeting ends, the women walk home through the brittle night, each one carrying her own mix of pride and resignation and hope so fragile it feels like breath on glass. You float a little above the street now, watching their silhouettes stretch across the snow. They have traveled through years of noise and necessity. They have held engines and responsibility and their own paychecks. And even if the world insists otherwise, they are not going back to who they were before. Something inside them hums, a low, steady vibration, like a machine cooling after a long shift but not shutting off. As they reach their porches, Christmas lights glow across the town, uneven, flickering, imperfect. But the glow touches their faces with a tenderness that feels like the beginning of something rather than the end. They disappear into warm kitchens and crowded living rooms and tiny bedrooms, and you sense history settling into them, shaping them, waiting for the moment when these quiet shifts will ripple outward into decades that have not yet arrived. You feel the cold sharpen around you again, not harshly, but with that crisp electric clarity that only train stations in winter seem to possess. And suddenly you're swept into a different kind of December noise, a noise made not of carols or clinking dishes, but of steam and shouts and boots scuffing across concrete as half the country tries to get somewhere all at once. You're standing now on the platform of a bustling station in late 1945, and the whole place feels like the inside of a heartbeat, fast, crowded, pulsing with anticipation and dread in the same breath. Steam billows from locomotives in thick, ghostly curtains, drifting over the platform before dissolving into rafters blackened by coal smoke. Every few seconds a whistle cuts through the air with a long, mournful cry, the kind of sound that seems too big for human emotion yet somehow matches it perfectly. The metal rails hum under your feet as a train approaches, wheels shrieking softly against the cold iron, and the vibration climbs your spine in a way that makes you understand. Physically, why travel in 1945 felt like moving through the center of the world's exhaustion. You glance around and see servicemen everywhere, clustered near benches, standing alone at platform edges, tightening straps on duffel bags packed with everything from spare socks to captured trinkets to blankets they pretend not to need, but are grateful to have. Some hold tickets home for their first peaceful Christmas in years. Others carry new orders stamped with names of places they've never seen. A transportation fact floats into your mind. That winter, American railroads were pushed far beyond their limits, carrying millions of returning troops and civilians at once, straining to cradle a nation in motion. You walk beside a young soldier shifting from one boot to the other, his duffel bag swollen with the strange geometry of hurried packing. He scans the crowd with a restless gaze, until he spots a girl standing near a bench, clutching a bouquet of winter greenery tied with a scrap of ribbon. The instant their eyes meet, something softens in him, shoulders loosen, breath steadies. But he doesn't approach yet. Maybe he wants one heartbeat where reunion still feels unreal, where hope can sit untouched like a snowflake on a mitten. A conductor bellows instructions as wind whips his jacket collar, his voice swallowed by the roar of engines warming for departure. Families huddle in tight clusters, talking over one another, adjusting luggage straps, leaning forward every time a whistle sounds. Somewhere nearby, a baby cries, startled by the metallic symphony of motion. Then you notice a giant chalkboard looming above the waiting crowd, numbers smudged and rewritten in frantic sequence. One charmingly human detail from the era station clerks constantly erased and redrew arrival times as troop movements shifted unpredictably. Chalk dust clung to their hair and sleeves like war paint of a gentler kind. You drift through the wide doors into the station waiting room, where the atmosphere is no calmer, just warmer. Rows of benches overflow with travellers. Soldiers nap upright, chins resting on their chests, exhaustion etched into their very posture. A woman knits with swift, anxious fingers while her teenage son glances at every uniform that passes. An elderly couple shares a thermos of weak coffee, whispering about their granddaughter in naval service who might make it home by Christmas Eve. Children weave between suitcases in quick, darting motions, their laughter high and bright, little fish slicing through coral reefs made of luggage and knees. Their mother calls after them with a mixture of amusement and worry, pockets bulging with small wrapped parcels tied in fraying string. She explains to a fellow traveller that her husband is still stationed in Germany, but she brings the children here anyway to let them see joy happening in real time, to keep faith alive until the moment becomes theirs. In a dim corner sits a young man in uniform, elbows braced on his knees, staring at the floorboards like he's waiting for instructions to rise from them. He holds a folded letter with worn edges, the ink slightly blurred. Maybe someone stopped writing. Maybe someone said too much. Maybe he's heading home to a house rearranged by absence. Researchers studying veterans' correspondence describe this fear often. The fear that relationships preserved through paper might not translate back into real life. At the kiosk near the entrance, a vendor sells newspapers, cigarettes, and candy bars, and you notice how people linger longingly over the sweets. Chocolate has been scarce for years. A lesser-known detail from the time, caramel and chocolate products often sold out within hours in busy stations, because returning troops bought them by the handful, craving small luxuries that tasted like childhood. You watch as a soldier chooses 2 bars, one for himself, one tucked carefully into his pocket for someone waiting. You follow him out onto the platform again just as the next train shudders against the rails, windows glowing faintly with the warmth of passengers already inside. Snowflakes cling to the soldier's eyelashes as he scans the platform a second time, hope flickering and dimming in a cycle only the heart understands. When no familiar face appears, he straightens with that practiced military motion, half pride, half armor, and steps aboard. You move down the length of the train, watching travelers climb the steps, a mother wrestling a suitcase while her teenage daughter pushes from behind, a college student clutching textbooks after a long semester of rationed supplies, 2 sailors helping an elderly man in a gesture so gentle it nearly startles you. A horn blasts across the station, deep, resonant, almost mournful. and steam pours outward in thick clouds, blurring faces, blending strangers into silhouettes. Train whistles, you realize, always sound like they're carrying both homecoming and goodbye. Climb aboard now. The passenger car is warm, almost too warm after the cold platform, and the air smells of wool and tobacco and wet shoes. People settle into seats with practiced choreography, sharing armrests, exchanging respectful nods, unwrapping sandwiches that smell faintly of wax paper and home. A girl in a checked coat offers her seat to a soldier. He declines gently, grateful but resolute. Someone at the back quietly plays a harmonica, the tune soft and just a little lonely. Then the train lurches forward, slowly at first, then with growing momentum. Through the window you watch the platform slide away, families waving, some cheering, some crying, some simply standing still, as if emotion has rooted them to the concrete. The soldier with the candy presses his forehead to the glass, eyes tracing the fading blur of faces until the world outside becomes darkness, speckled with faint reflections of the passengers within. Inside the car, the mood thickens into something indescribable, a mixture of hope, dread, longing, and the strange lightness that comes when a journey finally begins. Diaries from the period mention this feeling often, that train rides in the winter of 1945 felt like limbo, a suspended breath between the life soldiers left and the one waiting on the other end of the tracks. Night deepens. Windows turn mirror-like. You watch the soft reflections of tired faces drifting over the glass, like ghosts of futures still undecided. Someone snores gently. Someone whispers a prayer. Someone unwraps a sandwich with slow, reverent care. The train barrels into the dark, carrying its cargo of restless hearts across a country learning, inch by inch, how to be whole again. You step off the train and instantly the world quiets around you, as if someone has turned down the volume of December itself. The great roar of steam, whistles, and shouting fades behind you, replaced by the gentler rhythm of a small American town just beginning to glow with holiday courage. Snow dusts the sidewalks, thin and hesitant, as though it too is unsure how bright this Christmas is allowed to be. Main Street stretches in front of you, lined with storefronts doing their very best to shine, despite a year that has worn everyone thin. Strings of lights hang unevenly from windows, bulbs flickering with that warm amber glow unique to the 1940s, dim, imperfect, but comforting in the way candlelight comforts. They buzz softly, like a town quietly humming a song it once knew by heart. You pause at the first shop you pass, a hardware store where the owner, bundled in a thick cardigan, stands on a ladder fiddling with the last stubborn bulb. He mutters to himself with theatrical annoyance. But when the light finally sputters and then bursts gently into life, the man's whole face breaks open into a grin that seems far younger than his years. He climbs down slowly, brushing snow from his sleeves. In his window he has arranged a modest holiday display, a few tools set into a star shape, some leftover tinsel, a hand-painted sign that reads "Peaceful Christmas to All." During the war his displays were nearly bare. Now this modest sparkle feels glorious. Across the street, the barber shop has a wreath in the window made from twisted wire and scraps of fabric dyed green. Next door, the bakery has strung popcorn garlands across its awning, each kernel glowing pearly white in the lamplight. A small recorded detail from towns like this one. In late 1945, people made decorations out of whatever they had: buttons, walnut shells, ration book pages, scraps of tin, because holiday cheer was still a do-it-yourself miracle. You stop at the Five and Dime next, where a teenage girl is inside taping cardboard snowflakes to the glass. Her breath fogs the window in soft circles every time she leans close. She steps back, tilts her head, adjusts one snowflake by a fraction of an inch, determined to make the display look festive despite limited supplies. Her boss inside arranges a tiny table of holiday goods, soap gift sets, a few leftover tin toys, 2 pairs of wool gloves that look like they were hiding in a storeroom since 1942. Shoppers will still buy them, Gratitude runs deeper than selection this year. As you walk, you overhear two older men talking in low voices outside a drugstore. "Think it'll finally feel like Christmas again?" one asks. "Hard to say," the other replies, tightening his coat. "Too much happened. Joy doesn't sick to come back all at once." Researchers later noted this pattern. Rural towns often shifted emotionally slower than cities. News traveled differently. Soldiers came home in trickles, not waves. Joy needed time to thaw. Turn the corner and step into a tiny cafe glowing through frosted windows. Two waitresses decorate a tabletop Christmas tree with leftover buttons and scraps of ribbon. They laugh about its crooked trunk and prop it upright with a stack of sugar dispensers. A jukebox in the corner plays a wavering carol, soft, almost timid, as customers sip their coffee and savor the warmth. At one booth, a man leans in to tell his friend that a troop train came through last night, dropping off 3 boys from town. One of them still had bandages under his coat. He whispers, and the entire room falls quiet for a heartbeat. Then the jukebox melody swells a little, and the conversation gently resumes. Outside again, you notice telephone poles wrapped in strips of evergreen. Not real evergreen, you realize after stepping closer, but dyed paper curled to look like greenery from a distance. Supplies are still unpredictable. Creativity substitutes for abundance. Some storefronts glow with care, others remain half-finished, their owners unable to get the materials they needed. But even these unfinished windows radiate something tender. A hand-painted snowman, a single tin ornament hung from a nail, a cardboard candle carefully cut by hand. They whisper the same soft message. "We're trying." Farther down the street, you reach a tailor's shop just as a veteran steps inside. Through the window, you watch the tailor greet him and take the uniform coat he's brought. Many tailors in late 1945 became the first confidants for returning soldiers, altering uniforms so they could be worn with civilian clothing, transitional garments for transitional lives. You see the soldier's shoulders loosen as he steps inside, as if being understood without speaking is a small piece of peace in itself. Across from the tailor, a florist stands on the sidewalk arranging winter greenery into a modest display. Customers stop to talk with her, updating her on who has come home, who is still overseas, who will not be coming back. She listens gently, her gloved hand sometimes resting lightly on an arm. Community, you understand, is as much about listening as it is about speaking. A little boy stands outside a music shop window, his face squished against the glass. Inside sits a gleaming accordion, a harmonica, stacks of sheet music faded by the sun. His mother stands behind him, rubbing his shoulders through his coat. She whispers that maybe, if they save enough, he can start lessons next year. He doesn't turn too mesmerized by the instrument to do anything but dream. You head toward the town square, where workers are raising the community Christmas tree. It's tall, but lopsided. Its branches splayed like someone reaching out awkwardly for a hug. Volunteers unpack crates of decorations salvaged from previous years. Chipped ornaments, faded ribbons, tinsel made from wartime foil scraps. One clerk hands out strands of garland cut from old ration books, their faint printed numbers still visible, as if carrying the memory of years they survived. Evening deepens. Lamps flicker on, windows brighten. Children run down the sidewalks pointing at decorations, shouting predictions about presents with that unbreakable childhood confidence that good things are coming. Adults walk more slowly, smiling in that tired, grateful way that belongs to people who have been through something enormous, and somehow emerged still able to hope. You pause in the middle of the street and take it in. Nothing here is extravagant. Nothing is polished. Everything is earnest. This town, like so many in America, is practicing joy again, not perfectly, not easily, but sincerely. Decorations lean, lights flicker, displays wobble, but every imperfection glows with meaning. As you drift farther down Main Street, you feel a truth settle quietly into you. This is what peace looks like in its earliest hours. Fragile, homemade, and profoundly beautiful. You step through the revolving doors of a grand department store now. One of those proud, echoing palaces of commerce that small towns admired from afar and big cities took for granted. And the moment the warm air wraps around you, you feel a subtle but unmistakable shift in mood. This isn't the quiet, makeshift optimism of popcorn garlands and button wreaths. This is something bolder, though still cautious. A nation just beginning to remember what it feels like to want things again. Inside, the ceiling stretches high above you, its lights casting a gentle golden glow over display counters arranged with almost ceremonial care. Holiday music drifts from hidden speakers, not too loud, the kind of melody that seems to coat the room in a thin layer of reassurance. During the war, stores like this were stripped of variety, metal, rubber, even certain fabrics diverted to the front lines. But now, in this first post-war Christmas, shelves are slowly, almost reverently, filling again. A sales clerk with neatly pinned curls and a practiced smile arranges scarves on a counter in perfect fan shapes. She hums under her breath, not because life is suddenly flawless, but because the simple act of folding scarves feels like a declaration that the future might contain softness again. She smooths a satin ribbon with her thumb, and you can sense how new these small luxuries still feel, how fragile. Nearby, a family of four stands marveling at a shelf of chrome housewares. A toaster shines so brightly under the lights that the mother doesn't dare pick it up. She only grazes it with a fingertip, as if touching abundance too boldly might spook it into disappearing. Her husband murmurs something about prices, about waiting for the local factory to complete its transition from wartime contracts to peacetime appliances. Historical production logs confirm what you feel buzzing in this moment. Companies were scrambling, excitedly, anxiously, to pivot toward consumer goods even before the last battles had fully ended. And you see that anticipation flicker in the man's hesitant smile. He wants to bring home the future. He just needs to be sure the present won't shatter under its weight. Children ride the escalator beside you, stepping onto the moving metal plates with wide-eyed wonder. Escalators are still novelties in many places, metal dragons that hum and rattle and lift small bodies toward entire universes of possibility. At the top floor you find the toy section, still sparse by modern standards but bursting with life compared to the wartime years. Dolls with bright painted cheeks line wooden shelves. Model train sets sit in boxes tied with twine. A group of boys presses their faces close to a display of tin soldiers arranged in a miniature parade. One lifts a figurine, studying the tiny helmet with conflicting feelings: thrill, nostalgia, discomfort. His father gently takes the soldier from him and sets it back almost tenderly, as though unsure whether war-themed toys belong in their home so soon after the real thing. Historians still note this tension. Families longed for normal playthings, but recoiled slightly at reminders of a conflict that had consumed their lives. Nearby, a table of gift sets glitters with small luxuries, comb and brush sets in velvet boxes, tiny perfume bottles shaped like stars. A woman picks up an atomizer and sprays the faintest puff into the air, letting the scent drift across her skin. Her friend tells her not to splurge, but you feel in the way she presses the bottle to her chest that this isn't about luxury. It's about reclaiming a piece of herself the war borrowed and never fully returned. Walk toward the balcony and look down at the main floor. The scene feels like a snow globe, soft colors, bustling shapes, glimmers of sound and motion contained under an invisible dome of hope. Children tug their parents towards Santa, who occupies a small stage near the window. His suit is patched and his beard slightly askew. Kids don't mind. They climb into his lap with solemn little faces, whispering wishes that range from new shoes to the return of a father still overseas. A moment catches your eye. A little girl leans in and tells Santa something so quietly you can't hear it. But the man's expression changes, softens in a way that suggests her wish is not a toy at all, but a heart asking for something tender. As you walk through an aisle, something unusual catches your attention. A length of green drapery that looks oddly familiar. When you look closer, you recognize its mesh pattern. It's camouflage netting, leftover military stock dyed and repurposed as festive decor. Many stores did this in 1945, turning remnants of war into signals of hope. You descend the staircase toward the entrance again, where the scent of roasted nuts hits you first, a warm, sugary blanket that wraps itself around your senses. A vendor scoops almonds into cones of paper, joking with customers that he's offering energy for Christmas courage. His humor is contagious. People smile easily around him, grateful for a treat that had been hard to find for years. Near a polished display case, a man in a fitted coat hesitates before picking up a fountain pen. He uncaps it, tests its weight, and for a moment his face folds with emotion. Perhaps he wrote letters from distant places, telling stories in careful ink. Perhaps he hasn't written anything except necessity in years. When his friend encourages him to buy it, the man shakes his head. I need to be practical. You watch the conflict flicker across his face, desire blooming for a second, then retreating beneath duty. Two clerks nearby discuss shipments. One laughs about a recent crate that arrived stuffed with straw and dozens of extra shoelaces instead of gloves. Retail reports from late 1945 confirm these mix-ups, factories stumbling through the awkward adolescence of peacetime. At last you step toward the revolving doors. Cold air pushes in with a sharp little kiss against your cheeks. Through the glass you watch shoppers flowing in and out of the glowing building, their coats brushing against displays that glitter like makeshift stars. The windows shimmer with small heartbeats of light, and you sense the store itself a living organism learning how to breathe again. Here, in this grand but imperfect place, America is remembering desire, remembering choice, remembering delight, slowly, tenderly, almost reverently. As you step back onto the snowy sidewalk, you feel a quiet truth settle over you like frost on a window pane. Tonight, the country is dreaming again. Cautious dreams, humble dreams, but dreams all the same. You follow the gentle glow of evening foot traffic down a quieter side street, and soon you find yourself standing before a small toy shop tucked between a pharmacy and a bakery, its windows glowing with the kind of amber light that makes you feel welcome before you've even touched the door. Snowflakes drift lazily past the glass, catching the light in slow spirals, and a crowd of children is pressed against the window, their noses fogging the panes with breathy halos of excitement. Their muffled giggles vibrate through the cold air like tiny bells. Push the door open slowly. A bell jingles overhead, a thin, cheerful chime that feels like it's been waiting all day just to greet you. The inside of the shop smells faintly of sawdust, peppermint, and warm oil, the unmistakable scent of toys that are meant to be touched, wound up, spun, and loved. Wooden shelves line the walls, each one crowded with treasures that would have been unthinkable during the height of wartime shortages. You wander closer to a front display just as the shopkeeper, a man with round spectacles and gentle hands, lifts a metal fire truck from the shelf. Its surface gleams under the warm lights, bright and confident, as though it knows it represents something more than a toy. It represents possibility. He winds a small crank and sets it on the counter. The tiny ladder wobbles. The wheels click. The truck surges forward with a charming mechanical determination. A semicircle of children gasps, their eyes widening with a mix of awe and disbelief. It might be the first time some of them have seen a brand new metal toy in their lives. A manufacturing summary from late 1945 confirms that factories newly freed from military contracts rushed to reintroduce metal components to toys, specifically to signal the return of normal life. And in the sparkle on these children's faces, you see that message landing perfectly. Move deeper into the shop. A cluster of dolls sits in a neat half circle, their painted eyes watching the room with innocent vigilance. Some wear dresses hand-sewn from scraps of leftover fabric, floral prints, old curtain pieces, even parachute silk repurposed with care. Many doll manufacturers used parachute remnants for clothing in these years, and you can see it in the faint, delicate sheen of the tiny gowns. A little girl picks up a doll and gently smooths its hair. whispering something into its painted ear. The tenderness of the gesture almost makes the air itself soften. Turn down another aisle and discover puzzles stacked in tidy squares, board games wrapped in thin paper, maps of the world reprinted to reflect borders still settling back into place after the war's upheaval. A father studies a map-based game, telling his son quietly that learning the new world might be important. The boy nods solemnly, though his eyes are clearly fixed on the brightly coloured tokens inside the box. Educators of the time wrote often about toys becoming subtle teaching tools, bridges between bewildered children and a world reshaped by global conflict. You can feel those intentions in every bold colour and every simplified symbol. Pause near the tin spinning tops. Beautiful things painted in bright reds, blues and golds. A clerk gives one a sharp twist. It hums and vibrates across the counter, the colours melting into a mesmerising whirl. A couple nearby laughs at the sight, the woman commenting that during rationing years, wooden tops were the only option, and even those were scarce. But this smooth metal top, with its perfect spin, feels like luxury, a symbol that life might truly be lifting its restrictions. On a far shelf, a row of toy soldiers stands neatly, but not soldiers of war. These toy soldiers are marching band members, postal carriers, firefighters. In the early post-war months, many catalogues shifted away from military-themed miniatures, nudging children gently toward a different imagination, one without trenches or air raid drills. Still, an older man taps one figurine thoughtfully and murmurs to the shopkeeper, "Do you think they still ever bring back the battlefield sets?" The shopkeeper gives a soft shrug. People aren't quite sure what they want yet, and that is its own kind of truth. Move toward the back corner, where a peculiar object catches your eye. A small metal robot toy. Its limbs are stiff, its painted dials slightly crooked, but its novelty is irresistible. Early mechanical novelties like this emerged from factories experimenting with peacetime creativity, testing the waters of futuristic fantasy. After years spent manufacturing tools of survival, the robot clicks when you lift its arm. It clicks when you tap its chest, and somehow the simple sound feels like the spark of an era that will someday dream of rockets and moon landings. At the center of the shop lies a table where unboxed toys invite curious hands, a wooden horse on wheels, a metal airplane with a hand-painted star, a set of small harmonicas that children lift to their lips with instinctive music-making joy. A girl cranks a tiny music box. A fragile melody tinkles into the air, thin, crystalline, achingly sweet. Other children gather around, swaying gently, eyes half closed. For them, this is magic. Pure, uncomplicated magic. You drift toward the counter, where a man in a worn coat is choosing between two gifts, a metal train and a cloth doll with button eyes. When the clerk asks who the gifts are for, the man answers softly they're for his sister's children. She's still overseas, serving as a nurse, and he wants to give her kids something wonderful in her absence. The clerk wraps the gifts in paper decorated with gold stars, leftover wartime stock transformed into post-war kindness. Outside the windows, snow thickens, the street grows quieter. Inside the shop, warmth expands like breath, filling every corner. Children glow with delight. Adults glow with nostalgia. Shelves glow with the promise of a world learning to imagine again. And as you step back outside into the snowy evening, the bell above the door jingling faintly behind you, you realize something gentle and profound. These toys are more than objects. They are symbols of survival, of renewal, of innocence making a soft return, of a country cautiously rewinding its imagination. After years of tightening every emotional belt, you leave the warm hum of the toy shop behind and follow the faint glow of a porch light down a quiet street, drawn by a low, steady sound floating through the night, a soft murmur of music, static and human voices woven together like threads of comfort. You move toward a modest home where a frosted window glows amber from within, and as you step closer, the gentle crackle of a radio becomes clearer, wrapping itself around you with the warmth of something deeply familiar. In 1945 America, the radio isn't just a machine. It sets the pulse of the household, the storyteller, the companion, the memory keeper, the bridge between isolation and belonging. You slip inside and immediately feel how the room rearranges itself around the sound. The radio cabinet stands in the corner like a polished wooden altar, its dials glowing faintly, the speaker cloth trembling with each note. Families treated these sets with reverence because, in a world still trembling from war, voices carried across invisible waves felt like a miracle. A mother sits on the sofa knitting, her needles clicking softly in time with the music. On the rug, her son lies flat on his stomach, chin resting on his hands, listening with the absolute focus only children possess. The kind of focus that believes every word might be meant for him alone. The father rocks gently in his chair, tapping his finger against his knee, his eyes softening more with each measure of the orchestra playing through the speaker. Tonight's program features a holiday broadcast, one of many created that winter as radio networks rushed to fill the quiet spaces of post-war life with comfort. The orchestra swells into a gentle song, strings gliding over one another like snowflakes drifting toward earth. Adults close their eyes for a moment, letting the piece sink into their bones. For the first time in years, the music is not interrupted by alerts, bulletins, or grim updates. You drift closer to the radio cabinet and feel a faint vibration under your fingers. Then a children's choir begins to sing, bright, clear voices rising like tiny lanterns in a dark room. Their harmonies sparkle, delicate but confident, and for a few seconds you feel the whole country exhale. The announcer's velvet voice drifts in afterward, smooth and steady, telling a story about soldiers returning home, about families rebuilding traditions, about small towns lighting Christmas trees in their squares. His words carry hope, but here and there a tremor slips through, a reminder that healing isn't a switch you flip, but a slow, steady thaw. Then something rare and precious happens. A short greeting from a soldier overseas crackles into the broadcast, recorded on primitive equipment and sent across the ocean. Mom, Dad, Merry Christmas. I'll see you soon. The sound is grainy, faded by distance, but sincerity doesn't need clarity. Everyone in the room stills. Even the knitting needles pause. The little girl on the rug giggles when her brother imitates the announcer's deep voice, and the adults laugh too. Not the loud, extravagant laughter of celebration, but the tired, grateful kind that comes after months of holding things together. You move into the kitchen where another radio sits atop the refrigerator, humming softly as a woman washes dishes. She sways gently to the melody, finding in it a sliver of private joy. Kitchen radios in 1945 were tiny islands of autonomy, companions for long hours of domestic routine, offering music, chatter, and the comforting sense that someone out there understood the weight of being quietly strong. Static interrupts the program briefly, hissing like winter wind through a cracked window. No one is bothered. Static is familiar, almost comforting. During the war, it carried rumors, hope, warnings, and sometimes nothing at all. Now it carries the simple reassurance that the world is still broadcasting, that someone, somewhere, is speaking. Back in the living room, the program shifts to comedy. Two well-known radio personalities begin their holiday sketch, voices bouncing off one another with exaggerated cheer. Laughter fills the room, true laughter. The father slaps his knee. The mother hides her grin behind her hand. The boy on the floor imitates one of the comedians so accurately that even the announcer would probably chuckle. Radio ratings soared at Christmas. People were starving for humor, for lightness, for permission to be silly again. Then come the advertisements, tiny time capsules of hope and expectation. Stockings, tinsel, shaving kits, hot water bottles, cookies made with real sugar when available. Some ads gently encourage families to make home comfortable again for returning veterans. Others urge women to embrace domestic life, echoing the broader cultural pressure you witnessed earlier. The tension beneath these messages is palpable, change and tradition pulling against each other in the quiet spaces between jingles. You step onto the porch for a moment, Cold air brushes your cheeks. Down the street, a neighbor stands smoking his pipe. His radio turned up loud enough for half the block to hear the last song of the program. He nods at you, not to greet you but to share the music. Farther along, you see more windows glowing with the familiar flicker of radio light. Each soft illumination is a heartbeat. Each crackle of static a shared breath. Return inside now. The final chords of the broadcast fade. For a moment, the radio hums in that fragile space between sound and silence, a single exhale of static that feels like the machine itself sighing after a long day. The father turns the dial. The glow dims. The room becomes still, warm, complete. And you realize something simple and profound. In 1945, the radio is not merely entertainment. It is the voice of the nation, guiding, soothing, stitching people together after years of separation. You drift now into a quieter corner of the night, away from glowing radios and bustling living rooms, until you find yourself standing in a narrow hallway lit only by a small lamp and the soft reflection of moonlight on a frosted window. A modest wooden table sits beneath the sill, and on it rests a stack of envelopes tied neatly with twine, each one softened at the edges from being handled again and again. The entire house seems to lean toward this stack, as if the letters themselves carry a heartbeat, as if the past few years still echo inside their folded pages. In 1945, letters are not just paper, they are lifelines turned artifacts. Grief turned ink, hope turned handwriting. A woman sits down beside the pile and carefully slides one envelope free. She opens it slowly, reverently, as though she is performing a familiar ritual, one that carried her through the long, uncertain years. During the war, she measured her days by these thin sheets, sometimes waiting weeks for a single word. Postal archives confirm the astonishing volume of military mail shuffled through temporary centers, millions of letters each month, crossing oceans and continents to reassure, console, or simply allow someone to keep breathing for another day. But tonight the letter she reads is not from a battlefield or a distant ship. It sits from a soldier who is finally home. A soldier writing from only a few towns away. The handwriting is careful. The sentences are hesitant, like someone learning how to speak again. He writes about waking in the quiet and not recognizing the silence, about trying to sleep in a bed that doesn't rumble with engines, about mornings that feel too safe, too still. There is humor threaded through his words, but it wobbles slightly, fragile at the edges. The woman reaches out and traces his handwriting with her fingertip, as if memorizing the shape of his return. Across town, a teenage girl sits at her desk with a blank sheet of paper in front of her. For years, she wrote to her brother faithfully, telling him about school plays, neighborhood gossip, the dog's chaotic behavior, anything that might stitch normal life back into his days. But now he is home, and she's unsure whether letters still matter. She writes anyway, slow, looping lines about the snowstorm last week, about the church preparing its Christmas pageant, about her mother trying to relearn recipes with real butter instead of substitutes. Letters were her rope across the chasm of war. Letting them go feels like stepping off a cliff. A few streets over, in a dim room lit by a single bulb, a young man sorts through his own pile of envelopes. Some opened, some still sealed. His thumb lingers on one that arrived while he was in transport. The edges are frayed. The stamp is smudged. It is from a childhood friend who enlisted with him but returned home early because of an injury. He finally opens it. The message inside is brief. A job lead, a gentle encouragement, a soft reminder that even though life feels strange, he isn't walking alone. Researchers studying veterans' private letters note that these messages, quiet, tentative, deeply human, reveal emotional truths far more complex than official reports ever could. You walk down a hallway lined with framed photographs and enter another living room where an elderly father sits with a letter that arrived too late. The envelope bears military markings and a timestamp from weeks before the telegram that changed everything. His hands tremble as he unfolds it. The letter is ordinary, painfully, beautifully ordinary. A son asking for real bread. A son missing home, a son believing he would return. The father presses the letter to his chest. Tears rise, not explosive, not loud, but steady, carving familiar paths down his cheeks. Many households kept letters like these in small boxes or drawers, reading them over and over as if repetition could soften reality. You step back outside now, where snowflakes float gently beneath the street lamps. Mailboxes are decorated with small sprigs of evergreen placed by children earlier in the day. Down the block, a postal worker trudges from house to house, his breath fogging in the air. In the first post-war Christmas, postal carriers were openly applauded in some communities, thanked for the emotional weight their work had carried throughout the conflict. Even tonight, you sense that gratitude humming beneath the frost. You enter a modest boarding house where several young women gather around a table, writing letters on thin holiday stationery decorated with holly. They laugh softly, share stories, trade pieces of gossip, and lean over each other's shoulders to comment on sentences. One woman hesitates before sealing her envelope. A letter to her fiancé still stationed overseas. Her voice quiets as she wonders aloud whether he will feel like the same person when he finally returns. Her friends pause, then reassure her gently. Diaries from that winter often mention this fragile uncertainty. Upstairs, a newlywed couple sits beside a dim lamp, writing thank you notes for wedding gifts. The husband writes with neat but shaky strokes, mentioning to one relative that he still sleeps with his boots beside the bed. His wife rests her hand on his arm, not to stop him, but to steady him. Their letters are brief, simple expressions of gratitude. But beneath each sentence lies an unspoken message. We are trying. We are beginning again. Please be patient with us. Walk toward a schoolhouse on the edge of town. Children sit at tiny desks writing holiday cards to soldiers still abroad. Their teacher moves between them, reminding them to write neatly and be kind. A boy draws a tiny Christmas tree in the corner of his card, coloring it with a stub of green pencil. The children chatter. What do soldiers do on Christmas? Do they get snow where they are? Do they have presents? The teacher smiles softly, though her eyes betray the heavier truth. Some of the soldiers receiving these cards won't return until summer. Some won't return at all, but the cards themselves, bright, imperfect, full of hope, are small lanterns drifting across oceans. You pass a modest little house near the edge of town, where a woman sits at her kitchen table, writing a letter to someone who isn't coming home. She writes anyway. She tells him about the weather, about her plans for the garden in spring, about the neighbor's dog chasing cars. When she seals the envelope, she doesn't mail it. She places it in a wooden box with dozens of others. This ritual of writing to the absent, sometimes for months, sometimes for years, appears in many oral histories from families who needed time to let hope dissolve gently, rather than break all at once. Night has deepened now. The snow is soft. The world is quiet. You return to the hallway where the stack of letters rests under the frosted window. The woman gathers them with careful hands, ties the twine a little tighter, and places the bundle into a drawer, not to forget, but to protect. Letters have carried her across an ocean of uncertainty. Now they can finally rest. And as you step back into the cold December night, you feel how correspondence in 1945 has transformed from survival to healing, from holding on to learning how to let go, one hesitant sentence at a time. You drift now toward the edge of town, where the glow of windows fades into shadows and the world opens into quiet fields. Snow settles here in broader, deeper blankets, smoothing fences and rooftops into soft white humps. The silhouettes of barns and silos rise like dark, steady guardians over the land, and the air tastes cleaner, colder, sharper, tinged with wood smoke from distant chimneys. This is rural America, in December 1945, wide, still, holding its breath in a different rhythm than the cities. You pass a line of telephone poles leading toward a farmhouse whose porch light glows like a small ember. Before you step inside, pause for a moment in the yard. Listen, really listen. You hear the faint creak of a windmill turning slowly, a dog barking somewhere far off, the crackle of frost forming on wooden boards, and beneath it all the steady heartbeat of a land that survived the Depression, the war, the ration years, and somehow remained gentle. Push open the farmhouse door. Warmth rushes over you immediately, thick with the smell of pine and coal, and a holiday meal stretched as far as it can go. A family gathers in the main room, wearing sweaters patched at the elbows and boots dusted with snow. Their Christmas tree is a small fir cut from the back field, its branches uneven, leaning slightly to one side. Homemade ornaments hang from twine. Painted walnuts, cotton balls, scraps of lace, and tiny stars cut from old seed catalogues. A radio murmurs softly on the sideboard, filling the room with carols that rise and dip like lantern light. Rural households often felt the war's effects differently than cities. Slower to receive news, slower to lose men, slower to regain them. Some communities waited years for sons to return. Others lost entire clusters of friends and cousins. Tonight, the room glows with both joy and silence. In the corner sits a grandfather sharpening a pocket knife, not because he needs it sharpened, but because motion steadies hands that have held too much waiting. His daughter stirs a pot on the stove, tasting it thoughtfully as though the right flavor might coax the family's mood toward celebration. The youngest children play with a wooden wagon, the kind carved at home when store shelves were bare. A knock sounds at the door, soft, hesitant. Everyone looks up. A young man steps inside, snow dusting his cap, breath rising in small clouds. He's a neighbor's son, freshly returned from the Pacific, still uncertain how to enter rooms that remember him differently than he remembers himself. The grandfather rises first, his face cracking open with relief. The mother wipes her hands on a towel, tentative but welcoming. The children stand frozen for a second, then launch themselves at the visitor with unfiltered joy. Rural communities didn't just know their soldiers. They raised them, watched them grow, prayed for them by name. Someone pulls up a chair. Someone pours coffee. Someone hands him a plate before he can protest. He sits, shoulders stiff at first, then slowly softens into the room like a cold coat warming near a stove. He talks a little, laughs a little, stares into the fire for a long time. The silence around him is not uncomfortable. It's respectful, a space cleared for him to breathe. Outside, snow falls in slow, patient flakes. Inside, the room fills with voices. You drift toward another farmhouse a few miles away. This one is darker, quieter. A woman sits alone at the kitchen table writing in a small notebook. A list maybe, or a prayer. A photo of her husband in uniform sits nearby, angled so she can see it without touching it. He was supposed to return this Christmas. His letters stopped in July. She lights a single candle in the window, a tradition still common in rural areas, a beacon for travelers, for lost loved ones, for hope that refuses to obey logic. The flame flickers against the glass, reflecting not grief but steadiness. Move farther across the snowy plain toward a barn where lantern light spills through the cracks. Inside, a group of neighbors gathers around a long wooden table set up between hay bales. They've brought dishes, stew, bread, jars of pickles from the summer garden, and they share everything without ceremony. Barn gatherings like this were common in 1945, a way for isolated families to stitch themselves back into community after years of separation. There is laughter here, easy and warm. Stories passed around like loaves of bread. A harmonica plays in the background, its melody rising into the rafters alongside the scent of hay. One woman announces that her brother is coming home in January. Someone cheers. Another says she received a letter from France. Her cousin met a girl. Someone else whispers that a neighbor is struggling with nightmares. No one judges. These fields have seen storms before. They know how to shelter people. Look upward now. The barn rafters glow in the lantern light, dust motes drifting like pale constellations. Someone begins singing Silent Night in a low, steady voice, and the others join in, hesitantly at first, then fully, the harmonies weaving together like warm threads in a winter quilt. The music spills from the barn into the freezing air, rising above the fields, rising toward the distant mountains, rising like a gentle promise into the star-blurred night. Here in rural America, Christmas 1945 carries a different flavor. Quiet resilience, shared labor, heartbreak folded gently into gratitude. There are fewer lights, fewer store displays, fewer luxuries, but there is no shortage of togetherness. And as you drift above the snowy landscape, the barns and farmhouses shrinking below you like glowing embers, you realize that the country is healing from the outside in, from these quiet edges toward the bright centers, from the simplest homes toward the bustling cities, from grief toward something like hope. You rise from the quiet sweep of rural snowfields and drift eastward toward the faint glow of smokestacks and city lights, until the world gathers itself into streets and rooftops again. The air here tastes different, sharper, tinged with coal, restless in a way small towns never are. Industrial America of 1945 hums beneath you, not with wartime urgency, but with the uneasy rhythm of a country trying to decide what it wants to be next. You land near a row of red brick apartment buildings, their windows flickering with stovelight and early Christmas lamps. Children run down the hallway dragging tin toys and hand-me-down dolls, their laughter echoing off plaster walls patched with fresh paint. You pause at one doorway where a family has pushed their table close to the radiator for warmth. The father works at an auto plant that, just months ago, built airplane engines for bombers. Now the factory is switching back to civilian cars. A transition that promises stability but strains the schedule and pushes workers to their limits. He rubs his hands together, warming his knuckles after a long shift. His wife places a pot of cabbage stew on the table. Their little girl climbs into his lap, holding a crumpled Christmas card she made at school. Industrial cities move through 1945 like people waking from a long, violent dream, still twitching, still gasping, but reaching for daylight. You step back into the street and make your way toward a wide factory building where the hum of machinery pulses through the nighttime air. Inside, welders work under bright lamps, fixing the last of the war-damaged equipment before it's torn out and replaced with civilian tooling. Sparks fly in brief sprays of gold, lighting faces lined with exhaustion and strange optimism. Workers talk about rumors, refrigerators coming back next spring. Radios will finally have metal parts again. Maybe even television someday. It feels almost outrageous to imagine such abundance after years of scarcity. Yet you hear hope threading through their voices like a quiet new melody. Farther down the block, you find a union hall where returning veterans gather for advice on new jobs. Some carry resumes written in careful pencil. Others hold military discharge documents folded so many times the creases look like scars. A counselor reminds them that the GI Bill will help with school, with training, with home loans, if paperwork and delayed approvals don't choke the dream. A young man stands with his back against the wall, staring at a bulletin board plastered with job postings. He touches the brim of his cap and inhales, trying to convince himself he belongs in this new version of his city. He's fought in jungles, deserts, frozen ridges, yet this bulletin board frightens him in ways none of those places did. You sense the truth that settles over so much of America that winter. Peace is not the absence of fear. It is learning how to walk through fear towards something gentler. Move now toward a downtown street where storefronts glow with holiday displays. Nothing extravagant, nothing easy. A baker places the last few cookies in his window, their icing thin because sugar rations linger. A hardware store owner arranges shiny tools he finally received after months of shipping delays. A seamstress pins a dress to a mannequin, smoothing its hem with tenderness, whispering to herself that next year might be better for business. A crowd gathers around a department store window where mechanical angels turn slowly on a hand-cranked platform. Children press their mittens to the glass, blinking at the imperfect magic. Behind them, their parents stand shoulder to shoulder, some relieved, some grieving, all exhausted, and yet the moment forces a smile onto nearly every face. This is 1945's gift to the world. Not perfection, not abundance, not clarity, but possibility. You drift upward now, above the rooftops, above the moving crowds, above the chimneys exhaling faint ribbons of smoke. The country spreads beneath you like a quilt of glowing towns, dark forests, snow-bright farms, and cities pulsing with cautious hope. Follow those lights. Follow the living warmth of them. See how many are shining. See how many refuse to go dark. This is America, on its first peaceful Christmas after the storm. A nation stitched together by quiet rooms, by factory sparks, by handwritten letters, by laughter cracking open walls of fear, by radio voices whispering reassurance into sleepless nights. People are not fully healed, not fully ready, not fully steady, but they are trying, and sometimes trying is a stronger force than certainty. Sometimes trying is how history turns toward dawn. Snow begins to fall again. Soft, slow, forgiving. It glitters along the rooftops, settles into fields, softens the scars no one knows how to talk about yet. And as you float above this vast December landscape, you feel something warm press into you, as gentle as a hand on your shoulder. This is what Christmas really was in 1945. Fragile, homemade, courageous, held together by exhausted hearts learning how to beat in peace. You descend slowly, letting the night close around you like a blanket. The lights glow brighter, the streets quiet, the country breathes, and in that hush, the tender hush that only comes after a long era of noise, you realize that peace does not arrive with trumpets. It arrives like snow, soft, patient, changing everything without demanding attention.